All right, so I was in this open stream a couple days ago where we had the inimitable Pinecreek Doug. Pinecreek Doug, yeah, he was hanging out with Christians, palling around with us. And I just want to talk a little bit about what transpired. Now, if you were watching that stream or you were in that stream, that is not, some people were objected to Pinecreek Doug. That is not bad Pinecreek Doug. As far as I'm concerned, that version of Pinecreek Doug was almost good Pinecreek Doug. There are two Pinecreek Dougs. There's good Pinecreek Doug, when he has sometimes honest conversations on his channel with theists, and then there's bad Pinecreek Doug. Bad Pinecreek Doug, all he does is, ask leading questions, gotcha questions, and try and jerk your chain for however long. That was right on the doorstep of acceptable Pinecreek Doug. It almost was bad Pinecreek Doug. He was a little too Pinecreeky, too much like Pinecreek Doug. But that was within the boundaries of acceptable discourse as far as I was concerned. So that wasn't bad Pinecreek Doug. That was neutral. That was Pinecreek Doug. Not totally objectionable, not totally cool. It's just sort of in neutral, let's say. Now, why I'm bringing it up is I think there's a teachable moment in here. I really think there's something we could all learn from this. We could all grow and be better people from this whole experience. First of all, John seems to think that he really tore into Pinecreek Doug. I thought my phone cut out and I just didn't hear it. I'm not sure because my phone was cutting in and out during some of that exchange. There's a lot I didn't hear, but I don't think I missed it. I just don't think John's idea of tearing into somebody is, maybe his version of what it means to really go off on somebody is, as far as I'm concerned, it didn't happen. Now, I'll go back at some point and listen. Maybe my phone did cut out, but I didn't hear anything all that outrageous, so. But I think there's a teachable moment in here because there was a common mistake that was being made when Pinecreek Doug was trying to engage in the conversation, and even JB was doing the same thing, and a lot of atheists do this when you start a theological conversation. And this is why I say it's a teachable moment. You cannot believe in God. You are free to believe in whatever you want, whatever you think the evidence supports. But here is a big caveat. There are two types of conversations when you are talking about God. There are more, but for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to focus on two. There is a proof of God conversation. What is that, Craig? I am glad you asked. If I say, I believe in God, and you, Pinecreek, or you, JB, or any atheist goes, do you have any evidence for that? You got any proof for that? And I go, yes, as a matter of fact, I do. Kalam! Yes, I hit you with kalam. And you're like, kalam? What do you mean? Uncaused cause. And I start hitting you with kalam. I start doing my razzle-dazzle apologetic on the kalam cosmological argument, and normally speaking, you yield. Now, that is a proof of God conversation. So you are free to rebut based on the premises of kalam. Pinecreek will go, I don't agree, Craig, the kalam is not sound, I disagree with premise one. I think there's some, premise one being everything that exists, what is premise one? What's premise one? Everything that exists has a cause. Given all our newfangled ideas about quantum mechanics, I believe it is possible that some things pop into existence uncaused. I believe that's, potentially true. So I'm like, okay, and then we have a conversation back and forth over the Kalam cosmological argument. It's called a proof of God conversation. That is a very different kind of conversation than a theological conversation. And this is relatively important to understand, especially if you're an atheist. Why? Because you guys make this mistake all the time. And it's just a mistake. It's just a cognitive error. A theological conversation you can participate in as an atheist, but you cannot participate in it to prove that God doesn't exist. You are just, it's the same proverbial pigeon in the chess pieces game. There are rules to chess. You are playing chess. If the pigeon sits down at the table, knocks over all the pieces, says, I won. That's all you're doing. You are not proving that God does not exist by turning the conversation incoherent in a theological conversation. You're just not participating in the conversation. That's it. That's all that's going on. You aren't winning. You can't have a proof of God conversation and a theological conversation at the same time. Why? Because it basically just doesn't work. It's incoherent. And that's kind of what was going on. You can participate in theological conversation as an atheist, But in order to do it cleanly and correctly and be participating in the same ground rules as everybody else, you participate as if God exists. You take off your atheist hat for however long, 20 minutes into the conversation, and go, yes, if God did exist, then he could act this way. You can talk about God the same way you can analyze Hamlet. Okay? You don't think Hamlet really exists. You're not trying to prove the ontology of Hamlet if we started analyzing the motivations of the character Hamlet in the play Hamlet, right? You're not going to confuse the two kinds of conversations that instant. Why? Because you're sure that he's a fictional character. So everybody's aware that he's a fictional character. So we talk about him as if he's real. When Hamlet went into this room and he said to Ophelia, "Get thee to a nunnery. Why wouldst thou be a breeder of sinners? I am myself indifferent, honest, and yet I could accuse me of such things. It would be better my mother hadn't borne me. I'm very proud, revengeful, ambitious." That's what he says. That's exactly what he says. Go look it up. I swear to God, that's exactly what he says. I'm very proud, revengeful, ambitious, and yet with more something, I forget. I used to know that quote. More offenses than I forget. I used to know a quote. Anyways, so that's what Hamlet says. And if we're having a conversation about Hamlet, none of us believe that there's an actual human, and it's an actual real being. But when we are having a conversation, it's very similar to theological conversation. We're having this conversation about his motivations as if he exists. When Hamlet goes to this room and he said that to Ophelia, what do you think he meant? It would be totally incoherent if you were an atheist and said, "I don't believe Hamlet's real, Craig." Do you see? It's irrelevant. Another analogy to further underscore what I mean. Let's say I brought up politics, and your position on politics is like, all politics is evil. All right, that's a strong position. But when the Democrats, started talking about defunding the police, do you think that was a wise strategic move, or do you think that's good messaging, or what do you think about that? And you go, all politics is evil. You see how you're just not participating in the conversation. You're not making points germane to what is being discussed. And it's some of what was going on with this conversation that we were having. Now, like I said, that's not bad Pinecreek Doug. He wasn't doing it to the point where it was totally, in bad faith and like he was just playing gotcha games with Christians. I'm just telling you can't participate. He was doing what I just said. You can't have two types of conversations at the same time. Now, I'm somewhat sympathetic to what Doug complains about with philosophy, because he'll say, philosophy is just so airy-fairy and all up in the sky, and they just talk about, the grounding of being and all these things that nobody actually cares about, and he's right to some degree. But when we are talking about the problem of evil, it actually underscores the times where he is not correct, because the problem of evil has real meaning to real people in the actual world. It's not just philosophers gazing at their navel talking about, smart sounding stuff. If you listen to John Steingrad, for example, one of the actual reasons why he deconverted is rooted in the problem of evil. He went by his own admission, out of his own mouth. He went to Asia. I'm going to say Asia, but I'm pretty sure it was Africa. I don't know. I felt like saying he went to Asia and said, "Hey, wait, there really are starving people in Asia. What type of God is this?" He went to Africa. And I guess apparently he never watched TV. And he was like, "Wait, there's people starving here. God, what are you doing?" I guess he never turned on a TV before. Never saw what you think was happening when Sally Struthers would appear. Am I dating myself with that reference? Sally Struthers. Am I dating myself? Does that still to happen? Sally Struthers would come on your TV screen in the 90s and say, at 2 in the morning and say, "Can you believe that this is going on in Africa?" I guess you didn't think she was telling the truth. You had to see it with your own eyes. But so he goes to Africa and he sees with his own eyes that there's actual suffering in the world. And it becomes a conundrum for him, wherein he does what most people do with the problem of evil, and he starts going, "Wait, God, if you exist, why are you allowing this?" So he starts asking himself questions akin to the philosophies that have been around and been discussed for well-nigh centuries. So in some senses, philosophy does correspond to actual reality, to important things that people actually care about. And the problem of evil is one of them. It has real-world ramifications. Now, when Hayden was answering you, to some degree, why I'm prefacing this all is because Hayden, that's the first time I've ever engaged with Hayden. Guy is really well grounded in Thomism. Really, really, really well grounded. If you slowed down some of his answers and really thought them out, there are actually really good answers in there. Didn't quite get us over the finish line, didn't quite circle all the squares, didn't quite solve everything. But he was really thoroughly grounded in Thomism, gave a really good hearing of it in that particular stream. And here's the nub of the matter. There is a reason why, Thomas Aquinas was so profoundly influential in the Catholic Church. Something like 65% of all the theology is rooted in Thomism. Because when these questions come up, he actually thought them through, and he was a really intelligent human being, and he thought them through really well. Now, there are some aspects of Thomism that don't quite circle the square and that are debatably good, but he actually gives some really solid answers to some of these questions, and they make sense. And most importantly, if you're an atheist, listen to me, they correspond to reality, to the world as it actually occurs, the world as we actually inhabit it. They aren't just airy-fairy nonsense that Christians have thrown together to try and sound intelligent. They aren't. They're actually intelligent, well thought out, grounded answers. So, if you're going to participate in those conversations, you can't just hear the answer, not really hear it, and then loop it back to another question, because those questions start to become incoherent. That's exactly what started to happen with Doug. So he starts talking about evil. Can there be an evil God? And what we started telling him is the truth. There cannot be a negative ontology. The whole idea of an ontology of evil is incoherent. And if you weren't just trying to loop this back to let me prove that philosophy and Christianity is incoherent at root by making mush of the conversation, you would recognize that. The whole idea of evil requires, and this is what we were trying to explain in the conversation, and what Hayden was trying to explain, even to some degree, Spartan. Can you believe? Spartan even made a couple of intelligent points. I know I couldn't believe it either. He really did. And I was like, wait, what on earth? How is Spartan making intelligent points? He made a really good point. I'll get to it in a second. So, for example, in order for evil is not something that exists independent of other things. That's what we meant. Really think about that. Evil only exists in relationship to things. Only exists to harm something, destroy something, visit evil upon it. As the Bible says, the thief cometh not, but to rob, steal, kill, and destroy. Now, Satan is a being that embodies the characteristics of evil. So he just comes to lie, steal, kill, and destroy. Harm. Evil only exists in relationship to other things, to visit harm upon them or destroy them or be mean to them. Yeah, sometimes JP's really mean to me. I told you he's evil. He's really mean to me sometimes. That's all he exists for, is be mean to Craig. That's all he exists for sometimes. So, do you understand? There's no such thing as evil independent of things to visit evil upon. That is an incoherent concept, and that's what we were trying to explain. And this is where Sparta made the best point. It's like saying you can't shine darkness onto something. If you call it darkness, but it's actually the properties of light, you're just playing a word game. You're just, using the wrong word to describe something. Bearing that in mind, if you go back and listen to Hayden's answers, some of them are actually really pretty solidly good, and they are rooted really well in Thomism. You have to slow him down because he talks too quickly. But some of the stuff he was saying was actually really coherent and really pretty strong. There are objections to be made to some of the stuff he was saying. I'm not saying he was 100% right. But those objections have to be along the line of we are all having the same conversation, participating in it for the same reason. One or two of us can't decide, here's a good time to show the Christians that God does not exist by making this conversation incoherent and going, therefore, all theology is incoherent. See, don't you guys see? God doesn't exist. You can't gotcha us in those type of contexts at all. It's not doable. All it means is you aren't participating. Doesn't mean that you prove God doesn't exist. It doesn't mean you prove Christian theology is at root incoherent. All you did was not participate properly in the conversation. I think that was actually pretty clear. I actually think that was pretty good. So this was pretty good, Doug. This wasn't evil, Doug. This certainly wasn't bad, Doug. It wasn't good, Doug. Good, Doug is better than this. It was okay, Doug. Now, getting back, let me see if I have time, and I'll go into his problem of evil, I guess everyone was talking about that before I got there. I got about 5 more minutes. Okay, so his problem of evil. Now, the problem of evil as you were framing it, and I'm not sure if it's the exact one you brought up, Doug. I don't know if I'm assuming Doug is listening. Maybe he's not at this point. I don't know. But the problem of evil framed by Doug is not that challenging of a problem of evil, or the one that I've heard him say time and time again. I don't know if this is the same one. But basically, the question is, why would God create anything at all if he knows some things are going to wind up burning forever in hell? Okay, granted, kind of a good question, but you got the wussy theology of JON, for example, the Universalist, and I guess Spartan, I don't know, I guess Spartan copying him. Spartan's got his own, Spartan, what do you think? I don't know. John, what did you get for who goes to heaven? Everybody. Oh, yeah, everybody. I don't know. Spartan, I guess Spartan and John have their own little sect of Universalism. That circles the square perfectly for your, why would God create anything at all if some things are going to perish forever, given how awful those consequences are for whatever created. I guess what you're trying to say is you have so much empathy for all created beings that if you were God, you would rather not create it than have it burning in hell forever and ever and ever. I guess fair. I guess it's a fair question, kind of. Now, just a couple things of note to keep in mind. The Bible only says once or twice it would be better for that person if they were never born. There's only a handful of contexts where the Bible says that, which is just an interesting thing to note. Not saying it's evidence in favor of John's wussy universalism, but you would think if some things are going to be tortured forever, it would be better for absolutely every being that winds up in hell that they not be born. Correct? Correct. But it only says it a handful of times, and if I remember correctly, it's only there's only a couple of times where the judgment of God Jesus is like, this is so unbelievably terrible. It'd be better for you if you had never been born. I think in relationship to Judas, I'm going off the top of my head, so I didn't research this I never researched my videos prior to opening my mouth. Just open my mouth. There's a good side to that and there's a downside. I forget exactly where it says this. And then I think it was in relationship to whoever harms the young one. They're better to have a millstone tied around your neck and be dragged to the bottom of the sea. Yeah, pretty explicit. It's better. So don't harm kids. Why? Because it'd be better it'd be better for you. But it very rarely does it say, the people who are just generally described as perishing, it'd be better for them that they were never born. So you got to assume there's some sort of something about perishing that either doesn't quite mean burning forever in a lake of fire, because it would be better for anybody than have that happen from now until the end of time. Just a little thought, just a little side thought, not really of consequence. The point is, John's theology totally reconciles your problem of evil, easily, without even a moment's hesitation. So does mine. Spartan doesn't accept that. I don't know, because he wants to give people like Hitler a free ride, I guess. I don't know, but so does mine. I'm not necessarily universalist like those two are. I have no problem with it. They may be right, and I'm assuming that there will be retribution for harms done on earth, and if it doesn't mean, it doesn't have to mean, burn in a lake of fire forever. It doesn't quite seem fair to me either. So I'm not really married to what that punishment is. I'm not God, But in my theology reconciles it too. Those people chose to be horrible, terrible, evil people. That's not, just people who don't believe in God or Hindus. It's not people like JB who are basically decent people. That's like the truly evil human beings wind up potentially paying forever for how awful they were on earth. That's mine. That the people who wind up being judged that severely, to some degree or another, earned it by being absolutely terrible human beings. I guess you could still argue people will still argue eternal, whether that's fair or not. But the point is that reconciles it too. It doesn't. That's not something that you lose sleep over. Oh, how could a good God sentence poor Hitler to forever damnation? Poor Hitler, poor Himmler. It's only the truly bad. If there is a forever damnation, forever cut off from good and light, from now until the end of time, it is reserved for the truly wicked. Now, I could be wrong. So could they. All of us could be wrong. That's where your question, Pinecreek, your favorite question, could you be wrong? It gets asked appropriately. Could we be wrong? Yes. That's why I don't pretend like I know. I am not God. I didn't write the Bible, and I don't sit in judgment over all mankind at the end of the age. God does. I only assume, and this is something I assume based on theology and just based on my own personal relationship with God, that it's going to be completely fair. And nobody's going to be going, well, wait, you sentenced that guy to that, and that doesn't seem just and right. So, reconcile that however you want. If you want to be a total sellout wuss like JON or Spartan and say that means everybody winds up in the winner's circle to one degree or another, that's a little weak, but whatever. Whatever. If that's what you really think, that's how you really think it goes down. I don't have a committed dog in this fight. Hence, I am not dogmatic about it. Why? Because I do not know. I pray about it, and I have the thing that makes the most sense to me, and that's that true judgment is reserved for the truly evil. And the people who didn't know any better, no, they catch some sort of a break. And this is even according to the Apostle Paul. I was shown mercy because I acted in ignorance. And when he was talking about that, he was talking about him killing Christians. However bad you may think you are, however much of a badass you may think you are as an atheist, I'm so hardcore, man. You aren't out there killing Christians. So you aren't doing something, and the same Bible says God is no respecter of persons. So I see no reason why God would sovereignly introduce himself to Paul and not you. It doesn't correspond to what the Bible actually says. Because the Bible says that. Paul was shown mercy because he acted in ignorance. And when he's talking about when he was going to kill Christians. So if Paul was on his way to kill Christians, which is a lot worse than what anybody I know is doing, even people like JB, anybody I know is doing, then God sovereignly introduced himself to Paul. It makes sense to me that God would sovereignly introduce himself to everybody, and by extension, maybe what John thinks, maybe everybody, period. So, I don't really know. The point is, what is the point? The point is, theological conversations are not proof of God conversations. If they are to be participated in correctly, they are only to think through the motivations of God, and this is, if you're an atheist, you can participate in these conversations with a clear conscience. We don't demand that you believe in God to participate in the conversation, but to participate in authentically along the terms of the conversation itself so that it's coherent and makes sense. You have to put aside your atheist hat, and you got any evidence for that hat for the purposes of the conversation. You have to lay your sword down and participate as if you believe in God. Otherwise, you are just ruining the conversation. That's all you're doing. You aren't proving that God doesn't exist. You aren't even scoring points against our ontology. You are just not participating in the conversation correctly. That's it. That's all you're doing. So I think that made sense. Got a little rambly-pambly towards the end. But I'm pretty sure that was all pretty much, I'm pretty sure that all made perfect sense. So I will leave it at that. Like I said, that was not by any long stretch of the imagination bad Pinecreek Doug. That was neutral Pinecreek Doug. That was neither good nor bad. It wasn't good Pinecreek Doug. Good Pinecreek Doug, he had a conversation with Stuart. I think it was Stuart. I think it was Stuart of Ask Cliff's son. And that was a really good, really honest conversation. He may have even mentioned the flying man, but he didn't bring it out to gotcha the guy. I think he just brought it up in passing. So that was good Pinecreek Doug. This was in between Pinecreek Doug. The only reason I made this video is that it's very important if you are an atheist that you understand this. There are two types of conversation when it comes to theology or Christianity. Proof of God conversation and a theological conversation. They are separate kinds of conversations. They cannot be conflated. They cannot be intermixed. You are not proving that God doesn't exist by not participating properly in a theological conversation. You are just creating confusion. You are just not participating. So that's the most important thing to keep in mind. There's a lot of atheists out there who understand this, who, for the purposes of a theological conversation, lay down their atheist hat and participate in the conversation as if God exists. That's the only way you can legitimately participate. Follow things through to their logical conclusion within the context of theology. Other than that, you can't overlap those two types of conversations, it doesn't work. You aren't proving that God doesn't exist. You are just creating confusion. So, there you have it, kids. That is all for now. You know, go watch the video if you want. Apparently JON exploded. Oh my God. I swear to God, I'm pretty sure that my phone didn't cut out for it. It just wasn't really an explosion by any meaningful sense of the term. You know, maybe it's really mild manner. That counts as an explosion. That don't count as no explosion in New York. I swear to God it doesn't. I swear to God it doesn't even come close. Doesn't count as an explosion in my house. Doesn't even come close. Doesn't count as an explosion in any Italian household worth visiting or having a good bowl of lasagna at. Doesn't even come close. That barely even counts as like raising your voice or being in a heated discussion. Barely even registers as that. You know, that's why people think I'm shouting all the time. Why? Because they're weak. Because they're weak. That's why. So, there you have it, kids. That is all for now. The Mass is ended. Go in peace. Amen.